Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review, and in this video I'm going to review Malibu Liquor Store by Sit and Shine. 2020 has been quite a great and consistent year for Sit and Shine because this is the third album Sit and Shine have done in 2020, and also there's a big portion of their back catalog finally after numerous years being released on Bandcamp, which manages to give a great understanding of how their sound has been shifting all over those years. Some of the most important and most impressive albums in the whole catalog of Sit and Shine end up getting released this year, and this in comparison with some of the more recent stuff we've seen from Sit and Shine shows that some things have gradually changed, but some of the main ideas and approaches still stay quite the same. Sit and Shine's brand new project, the third one from this year, is a work they did with Rocket Recordings, which gives the impression that we're going to talk about a more avant-garde, psychedelic krautrock release, and this is the case with this album. It's the least aggressive out of the three, and I really didn't know what to expect about this album, but if you do listen some of the stuff in their back catalog, you can see that the sound from Sit and Shine has not shifted in the greatest way in the past couple of years. They have still done some impressive stuff. I mean, even from this year, the first album they did, Scenic Farm, was actually a pretty good work, and it is going to land in my favorite albums of this year. Couldn't say quite the same with the next album they did, Goat Yelling Like a Man, which had a really poor mixing to it and overall having multiple ideas that we've heard from Sit and Shine done better before. And this album is more of the same in terms of structures and approaches and the overall manipulation of sounds, showing that the whole project of Sit and Shine is slowly getting out of ideas. The overall consistency of their catalog has worked amazingly throughout lots of years, but this is one of the few points where I find that they're missing this mark that made so many of their works have such an interesting appeal, making for some of my favorite albums in terms of experimental rock and electronic music in the past 2 decades. Malibu Liquor Store over here feels like it has a bit of a more tropical sense to it. It's a really witty, fun and catchy project with a few summer vibes and overall having mostly elements of like sort of disco with krautrock and psychedelic rock. It makes for an interesting formula. It's something that we've seen from Sit and Shine doing before, and they obviously give big emphasis on sampling, which is quite consistent in this project as well. However, in my opinion, the sample over here doesn't work that much in its favor, as in my opinion there are multiple occasions in this project in particular where I can't really tell if I'm listening to a sample or an original work of Sit and Shine, which is something that I never saw myself having that much of an issue with previous projects, as I would find that there would be a nice balance and combination of so many wacky and different experimentations with the sounds throughout the tracks. This is not happening with this album, as I find that for the most part the ideas presented over here are extremely lackluster. Take for example the first and self-titled track. It mostly feels like there's just a sample that they put just looping itself over and over again and just manipulating it, shifting its structures, using some stretch effects, some glitch, which is the typical formula that we've seen in numerous Sit and Shine albums being done over and over again, and it's at this point where it becomes a bit tiresome. Like there's nothing more, something more unique, something different to it. It's pretty much what you would expect. It's actually the only characteristic that shows that this is a Sit and Shine track. And even in like following the formula, I think that the group has done this better in the past. The same I could say being the case with tracks like Cream Tea, for example, which is a really lackluster moment into this whole project, and also the final moment being a really smooth jazzy track, Barbara and Woodrow, but I would like something more engaging out of it, something that would make for a greater balance of multiple different sounds and just giving an overall impression that it's not just weird experimentations coming all over the place. There is also the quite short track Servette, which goes goes for almost less than 2 minutes. It's basically the most fun track out of this album. It has a sort of a comedic feel to it, and it's basically the same loops going over and over again, and just filled with so many random elements of just pure experimentation with glitch and stretch, to the point where it's like too much. We get it. You like using those types of effects. The one thing that manages to be a bit of a saving grace for this track, in my opinion, is when it transitions to those sections where there is an additional synth string passage to it. In my opinion, I like the way it shifts from one point to the next in its own messy way. Then we have those tracks that feel like they're more like original ideas, having some smooth beats to them and overall having a really intriguing feel of experimental electronic music. But even in these occasions, I ended up finding some of those moments to be quite lackluster. For example, the track Rat Snake, in my opinion, has many great elements to it. I like this buzzing synth. The overall sound and approach to this thing makes for a really intriguing track, but it goes for about 7 minutes, and I don't think that there is that much of a development to this track. There could honestly have been so much more going on to this track in particular, and I never really got to that point. I would say the same for the track Sheriff of Yates Hill, which is a much shorter moment, but I still didn't find so many engaging parts about this song, even though it had potential, because I overall like some of the scenes and some of the passages in this song in particular, but instrumentally there could have been a bit of a more variation to it, something that would make it more exceptional, more captivating, not necessarily being so randomly messy and chaotic, but it wouldn't necessarily need to be all that bland. There are still though some pretty solid moments out of this album. It's not like everything out of this album sucks. I really enjoyed the 10.5-minute track Hillbilly Moonshine. Kind of repetitive and one-dimensional, but I overall find that the idea behind this track is really well put together. This is one of the most original sounding tracks without giving that much of a simple emphasis on just sampling. I find that the minimalism through this song works in its favor for the most part, and I overall like the overall balance and mixing of all of the sounds coming together. It has a simple beat to it that it's quite catchy, and it has all of those wobbly bass synths. The overall structure and the way it's put together makes it without a doubt the greatest moment out of this whole project. There's also the quite short 2-minute track Devil's Blackbone, which is also one of the most unique moments over here, as it's definitely the most aggressive and the most intense track out of this whole project. It has a bit of a more industrial feel to it, and in my opinion it offers some great characteristics from the sound of Seat of Shine. Never getting way too chaotic or messy for no reason, it's simple to its structure and it's quite effective for what it does, with a very nice mix and balance of multiple sounds coming together in a really smooth way. The overall experience with this album leaves me with mixed thoughts, as I find some of the best tracks they did on this year to land on this album, but this is also an album that lacks on originality and engagement, with many of the tracks just sounding really forced, with a Sit and Shine formula being thrown at us once again without using something new or unique to it and making it kind of predictable. Malibou Store has its moments, but it's far from the greatest thing Sit and Shine have ever done. I'm going to give this album a 6 out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why, and what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.